Hello everybody. A lot of interviews for assistant professor posts are happening across the country. In Kerala PSc lectureship interview is coming up. So I thought this is the right opportunity to do a model interview that will help all of you to make your own preparation for that big day that will decide your career. So we have a model candidate here. I will be asking some sample questions. These are by far not the only questions that can be asked in an interview. There can be many questions, but these are a few questions that are possible. And you can develop your own style of answering. You can make your own choice of text when you answer the questions. What you should ideally do before the interview is make a big list of one author and text from all areas of English literature, all literatures like British, American, Commonwealth, etc. and also all movements, all centuries. Make a big list and prepare those authors and works so that when the interviewer asks you, you will be able to answer from that list. You will be already prepared. And it's very important to rehearse, talk to yourself, either in front of the mirror or in front of somebody, because that practice of answering, speaking will immensely help you. So this is why we are doing this model session. I hope it will be immensely beneficial to all of you. We have here with us Irina. Irina, please introduce yourself.
As you said, I am Irina Nasruddin. Just finished my MA and I've recently joined for research. And I'm doing research in the field of English language teaching.
Yes, very good. So you're doing research. Can you briefly tell me what your research project is on?
My research is based on children who have difficulties in language, and I'm trying to develop their English language skills.
And why are you interested in English language teaching?
I love literature, but I often see that language development is one of the necessities that we face today. It's very important for every individual actually to communicate one's ideas clearly, to convey and express oneself. So I think language development is important.
Very good. I am interested to know, what are the current developments in English language teaching in the 21st century?
Okay. Whenever we speak of developments in ELT, it always starts with communicative language teaching, the one that has been a breakthrough in the history of ELT. And nowadays we have lots of developments away from CLT, lots of methods have come.
And Irina, have you lost touch with literary studies because of your specialization in language studies?
There are times I'm more focused in the research area and I read books related to that area, and compared to the earlier days, maybe my touch is a little bit lost, I would say. But at the same time, I have tried by reading books, maybe listening to literature videos and all that, so that I don't completely lose connection with literature.
I get you. Let me ask you another question. What about literary theory? Do you think literary theory is important in literary studies? For example, there are people who say that you don't really need literary theory to appreciate literature. Do you agree? And also, what is the role of theory in your research?
I would say literary theory is the one that always helps us to have a better perspective of a text. It always helps us to gain a new understanding of a text. So when it comes to my research, it's not as much related to theory, I would say. But when it comes to teaching of a text, yes, theory matters. It helps in gaining new ideas, and everyone can come up with new ideas if one tries to apply theory.
Then what about the classics? I think literary theory is mainly about decanonization. We don't give importance to the classics anymore, do we? But aren't the classics important? Shouldn't we study both in the syllabi?
There was a time when classics were highly preferred, or classics were considered to be the sole texts that need to be taught or studied. because aesthetic value was preferred those days. But nowadays we look for other values in text, maybe political critique, cultural critique and so forth. I would say what we need to have is actually a balance where we read both texts, where both kinds of text, canonical and non-canonical text, are being discussed in a classroom.
Let me ask you about a classic text. Take for example Moby Dick. In American literature, it's a classic. What is the significance of Moby Dick? Why is it a classic of American literature?
Moby Dick is indeed a magnum opus written by Herman Melville. So when it comes to Moby Dick and America, I think it represents the national consciousness of America. There are lots of elements such as individualism, or there is the binary between nature and culture that is being portrayed, and moreover I would say there are even elements of dark romanticism in the text.
You just mentioned dark romanticism. Can you explain dark romanticism, please?
Okay, so in the case of dark romanticism, I think it's actually a subgenre of romanticism itself, and it is the one that constitutes dark themes, discusses the dark passions of human psyche perhaps. And when it comes to dark romanticism, I think it has particularly flourished in American literature, and we have many writers such as Nathaniel Hawthorne or Edgar Allan Poe, etc. Yes, yeah, I think that's what I have to say about dark romanticism.
Now that we are talking about romanticism, I would like to ask you, what is the name of that group of romantic poets, Neoromantic poets, who were very popular in the 1940s? Can you name them and explain their features?
Okay, Neoromantic poets, I think they are Dylan Thomas, and then there is Henry Trees, etc. And these poets are actually associated with New Apocalypse movement as well. And Neoromantic poets are the ones who in a way restored the romantic spirit in literature. And not only that, they have dealt with intense emotions, maybe lyricism, and themes such as childhood, nature, etc. And we could perhaps see in some of the poems of Dylan Thomas, maybe the poem in October. Yes.
Do you know there are the elements of a particular avant-garde movement in Dylan Thomas's works? Do you know what that is?
I'm afraid I cannot recollect at this moment.
Well, it's okay, I'll help you. It is surrealism.
Okay.
Now, my question is, what is common to these writers? Salman Rushdie, Ben Okri, Haruki Murakami and Amitav Ghosh.
Okay, if I take a moment to recollect.
Irina, I will repeat the authors. Here they are. Salman Rushdie, Ben Okri, Haruki Murakami and Amitav Ghosh.
So when it comes to the writers that you've mentioned, I think they are all writers who are contemporary, who can be called as post-colonial writers as well. And these writers are actually the ones who always wanted to bring in a different perspective on the existing issues, for which they have employed various techniques. Maybe, for instance, I think there is surrealistic elements, but more than that, especially with respect to Salman Rushdie and Amitav Ghosh, I think there is the element of magical realism.
Irina, actually they are all writers of magic realism. Now, it's a little confusing. Tell me, what is the difference between magic realism and surrealism?
Okay, in that case, I would say magical realism as well as surrealism, they stand somewhere in between reality and imagination. And when it comes to magical realism, it more or less deals with the depiction of reality itself, even when there are elements of fantasy or surprise or any such features. Reality still is highly visible, it persists. But when it comes to surrealism, I think it more or less deals with maybe, if it can be called, a distortion of reality.
Other than magic realism, can you tell me what are the other styles used by post-colonial writers?
Okay, see, post-colonial writers have always tried to rewrite colonial history as we know, and for the purpose they have employed various techniques. starting from multiple narrative voices to intertextuality, to unreliable narrators and much more. And in their text we can see a number of things, because if you want to read a text we have to apply a number of elements, such as there is feminist stance could be seen, there is the maybe cultural materialism or even new historicism per se.
Okay, Irina, so what is new historicism?
I think a new historicism is about a novel reading of history, where I think history as well as that is the text as well as the context becomes important, both are together, and in a way it tries to critique the way in which history itself is written. I'm not sure of it though.
Irina, many of your answers are right. So you don't have to be apologetic. Relax. You're doing well. Let me ask you something that you're comfortable with. What is the importance of Noam Chomsky in language studies?
In the case of Noam Chomsky, he emerged in linguistics as a critic of behaviorism, and he's the one who actually told us that, see, language learning is not merely memorization, it is beyond that, because we all possess those abilities of language learning. And he's the one who talked about language acquisition devices as well as universal grammar.
And lastly, I would like to know how you would teach a particular poem. Let us take a very significant poem itself, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Show me how you will introduce this poem to your students.
Good morning. Today we are going to discuss a seminal text of modern era. The text is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot. The poem with 433 lines, the one edited by Ezra Pound, the work that discusses the crisis of modern man, the crisis of the modern century, the one that has features ranging from fragmentation to that of intertextuality. It basically has 5 parts. It begins with burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, I suppose you remember that. Then comes a game of chess, which marks the degeneracy of love and sexuality, the modern man who is devoid of emotions. Then it moves on, and then we reach the fire sermon, the one that discusses the sermon of Lord Buddha and Saint Augustine. And then, as you might have already guessed, we have the section Death by Water, the shortest section. The crisis of modern man, how can it be solved? How can he be redeemed? That is what is being discussed in the final section, What the Thunder Said. So can we discuss the poem in detail?
I think it was a very good attempt, Irina. Don't you think so, guys? Let me help you a little bit more. When you are asked to teach a poem or a text, how do you do it? You have to know the context. You have to know about the author. You have to know the significance of the text and a brief summary of the text. And then you should be able to introduce all this in a very relaxed and very clear, confident manner. Don't be nervous and don't be over dramatic also. Moderately relax, say all your facts in a very clear and interesting manner, and make sure you connect all the information that you give. First, start from context if you want. You can start from anywhere, in fact. If you are starting from the context or the theme, slowly come to the author. Talk a little bit about the author. Don't make it too long because your time will be limited. So just briefly introduce the author, introduce the poem or the text, and show that you know the content, you know the theme and the treatment of the poem. So all these major points when you speak, by then your time will be over. You don't have to say each and everything about the poem or the text. Don't worry about that. They are just checking whether you are a good speaker, whether you know the style of teaching, and whether you know the basic essential aspects of the text. That is all that will be checked in an interview. Okay? So be confident, rehearse properly, and make that big list that I told you about, and I'm sure you will all do amazingly well in the interview. All the very best, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video.